Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Win Kay, who's the General Manager of Dplay International for Discovery. Dplay is Discovery's hybrid streaming services, which has grown in popularity over the last few years. Win, you've been very busy as Dplay is already in multiple markets: Italy, Netherlands, Spain, the Nordics, the UK, plus Japan. Just to start off with, why don't you just tell us what the next steps are in terms of your international expansion?
So first off, thank you for having me, Justin. And I think for us, it has always been a differentiated strategy for Dplay, where we're thinking about leveraging our local aspects of our content commissioning and our knowledge about each of the markets. So we don't really have a strategy where we're like a one-size-fits-all, like the global OTT products like Netflix or Amazon. We actually use very much our local expertise in commissioning shows, our unique distribution and partnership in each of the local markets. And as you said, a hybrid service, which really translate into in markets where we have key, content that can work on an AVOD, advertising funded model or in a subscription model, we would actually have both on the same service in a particular country. Whereas in some markets where we do have a little bit of a different strategy, it might just be an AVOD, or in some markets on the opposite end, it will be just as an SVOD.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. So do you see this as sort of Discovery's platform, if you like, to add, if you like, to all these AVOD services that analysts are predicting?
It's yes in one hand, and I'll come to the specific on why I said that, and no on the other hand. On one hand, yes, we Dplay in markets where we might not have the full strength of both our strong linear share of voice, or we have unique content proposition that can really build up a credible subscription business. Then Dplay will be used as more of a complementary to linear business, where we have more inventory that couples with the linear inventory with digital inventory. That has become some of the, I would say, the more smaller markets that is more fragmented across, and traditionally in the linear world, those would be markets where we only carry some of our pay TV channel brands. In markets where we have big, broadcast and distribution channels like the Scandinavian markets, Italy, the UK, and a few others across Europe, then it becomes a very different proposition. Dplay becomes the transformation of our digital business, our linear business, into how we pivot towards direct to consumer in a much more aggressive manner.
I'm very interested in these hybrid models, like how you arrange your relationships, if you like, with existing pay TV operators, where you have carriage fees, and now you've got this direct to consumer proposition. You have obviously linear properties too, and probably a new suite of advertising services to go with your AdVOD propositions. Like, how do you juggle all those? Because I'm assuming in some markets where you have a pay TV service, for example, or you're on a pay TV platform and then you're going direct to consumer, does that cause any conflicts?
I have to say, one of our most important partner in this, even in this new ecosystem, is actually our traditional partners, like affiliates and distribution partners. Mm-hmm. But I have to admit, 2 years ago when I kind of took charge of Dplay, this was not a popular topic among some of the more prominent distributors that we have in a lot of markets. Mm-hmm. But I think it was one of those moments where I think the trust and just really trying to test out hypotheses that maybe people who are watching on linear television and on OTT might be slightly different in terms of demographics and age. Mm-hmm. And consequently, we started with a few shows, and most of these shows are typically younger in its purpose. And then the more and more we got into the rhythm, the more that we actually went back to the affiliates and said, hey, we actually saw a very different, unique demographics of user who are actually consuming Dplay, which are very different than our traditional linear business. I mean, Our traditional linear business demo are from like 50 to 60 years old. Where Dplay in the market, like the Scandinavian market, it's around 20 to 35. So it's hugely different. But I think the more we get into these conversations, the more we kind of partner with affiliates, the more we're realizing that we can actually have a very robust, two-pronged strategy of, a service that can actually have its prime and premiering on digital service like a Dplay, while it's not cannibalizing the traditional pay TV service. And we've actually seen in some markets and some shows, when you actually did it on Dplay and premiere on Dplay first, the linear rating in that particular show that came afterwards was actually higher than the previous season when it was not premiered on Dplay. So some very interesting statistics that we found over the years.
So being available digitally and on all devices, you're actually tapping into newer audiences and changing sort of demographics, which leads nicely into the sort of the advertising side of the business. But to give an idea of the sort of balance you have to strike, in Germany you've got a joint streaming venture with ProSiebenSat and Joy, sorry. And that includes free and ad-funded discovery content. So how does that fit in with Dplay? Is that instead of Dplay in Germany?
Yeah, that's actually instead of Dplay. So in markets where we as big as Germany, unfortunately our linear business is not as significant in that market. So our strategy in some of these markets where we know it's a big bet for us is to partner with a local, leaders in local entertainment, and ProSieben obviously fit that profile. And to get that consolidation of AVOD and SVOD, I mean, there's something very, very interesting happening in Joyn, although it's still early days, but their consumption is actually 50-50 on the simulcast. So that's the linear channel stream on Joyn, and VOD at 50-50%. We don't actually see as much in other Dplay markets. So the adoption of whether it's an AVOD market or an SVOD market on the consumption of those things can be so different and so skewed depending upon the market maturity and who's actually carrying you on as your partner, the content profile. But I think it's also about the content. What's the content proposition that you're bringing into the mix, right? Where in Dplay, we're bringing most of that into the mix ourselves and using both our pay channels as well as our free channels and making those available, whether that's through an SVOD proposition or an AVOD proposition.
Yeah, so your launch basically with your hybrid models and stuff really depend on each market. The characteristics are all completely different. So you mentioned this earlier about how people are viewing, and I'm wondering what your attitude is to connected TVs. When it comes to sort of big screen viewing, if you like, do you want people to end up finding you on Roku, Fire TVs, or smart TV platforms, or are you happy for consumers to keep watching your free-to-air channels on television via linear broadcast? Your established platform partners, while using Dplay sort of on your phone and computers? What's your sort of attitude towards all that?
Well, the simple answer is that we want them to be on any platform that they want to be on Dplay as long as possible. And we've seen that across all markets, that when you actually get people on the smart devices, connected devices, and it doesn't have to be just pure smart TVs. It could be Fire TV, it could be Chromecast, it could be tvOS. Those are typically the people who are more committed and actually are staying with the platform significantly longer than people who just come and browse through Android device or just a phone like iOS. So yes, the answer is definitely that we're seeing a lot of trends that moving towards more connected device ecosystems across all markets.
But is it your sort of intention to get them from a device to the big screen, for your advertising proposition, or does that not matter to you?
If we're zoning in on advertising, yes, for sure. Right. Yeah. I think with programmatic, with advanced capabilities on targeting on TVs, it has to be much more on the smart TV or like the HbbTV kind of platforms. And we're actually doing a lot of experimentation on that as well. Because again, at the end of the day, our business is still very much linear in terms of revenue, the lion's share of the revenue. So for us to be able to do that both on OTT and linear does give us a lot of optionality. How do we want to approach this hybrid world of advertising and subscription.
Well, you mentioned this briefly. You're obviously in an IP world here, so you can do a lot more in terms of advanced advertising. You've got programmatic, addressable TV. Just briefly, what is your roadmap sort of for your ad tech sort of proposition with your streaming services?
This is where we actually rely heavily and very specifically on a global strategy. We have a centralized technology platform that powers a lot from identity management. So all identity across all our Discovery products are actually unified under one technology stack. Our video streaming is actually all built in-house. So a lot of these capabilities are already there. And in our most advanced market, which is in the US, we're actually learning a lot from our peers in the US on how they do very advanced targeting, both on linear as well as on digital, and bringing that across into Europe, especially. But again, as your background is from this area as well, I mean, with GDPR, that is not an easy proposition to get over in terms of how do we make sure we are compliant with first-party data and all the different consents that we need to get from the consumers.
Sure. So your future is to sell audiences regardless of the platform and unify it with a data set to help them target, etc. It's a classic roadmap that a lot of people are going for. Don't worry about the device. Just worry about the sort of the target audience.
It's the audience, and once you do that, materially, you're also really unlocking maybe even a greater proposition is that you're trying to really super serve your audiences by letting them know what they actually might like, and that's actually the question is what they might like.
Yeah.
The thing about Discovery, most people don't realize it. At any given market, we might have 20 to 30, 40,000 episodes of content at any given time in Dplay.
Mm-hmm.
That's significant amount of content. So to actually find an audience who might really like our crime series with ID, with food, with our reality shows, that is not an easy task by any stretch of imagination. So getting that really right for us. So audience segmentation and personalization becomes super critical for even our venture on keeping our subscribers happy.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I just hope that TV doesn't freak consumers out like digital does with terrible follow me ads and all the rest of it, and the hyper targeting that actually just does scare people. So very briefly, you completed a sort of a creative rebrand in Europe, which means Dplay becomes a sort of unifying visual feature across I think all the channel brands. What's the rationale for that?
The rationale really starts in the Nordic markets, where we, again, and this is a reflection of most of our major markets, where we have 12 to even 15 channels, brand identity in all those markets. So in an OTT world, where ever growing, that the consumer is the one who's actually picking what they want to watch, we do need a consolidated, at least branding that allows us to make our consumer journey much more frictionless across linear towards digital, right? And back and forth. Mm-hmm. So it actually started with a linear mindset to shift people to digital. But on the other hand, people are still switching from OTT to linear as well, especially when we see COVID. They're on TV much more than they have ever been across all different markets that we operate. So having that visual identity to really resonate between both audiences, I think is a benefit, especially in a very fragmented market of pay TV and free-to-air channels.
Yeah, well, you've mentioned the sort of shift in consumer behavior here and viewing trends in various different markets. And I guess you can close out to sort of describe to me, in your view, what is the sort of big vision of Dplay? Where do you see this service in the next 5 years?
In core markets where we believe that Dplay could become a Hulu model of international. So very much similar to how Hulu started, was getting all the different studios in. We're kind of making some of those experimentation already with Join, with ProSieben in Poland, with Polsat, with our TVN player. And the Nordic is kind of like the epicenter of this strategy, where we're doing it alone. And now with an announcement we just made not long ago with carrying out TV4 content slate from Sweden, making that strategic move to become an Uber aggregation of all the local sports and entertainment proposition. That is where I think we can effectively compete and have a differentiated strategy than the Uber supermarket size aggregation like the Netflix of the world. So that is really the core of how Dplay hopefully can evolve and really make it a strategic part of the overall discovery strategy.
Well, Dplay then could be the super aggregator of OTT services in Europe. I don't think you'll be the only one going after that model, so that'll be a very interesting space to watch. Wim, I really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you, Justin.